Imagine you're a sailor in the ancient world. You have been blown off course. You land your wooden ship on the rocky shores of a strange, uncharted island in the Mediterranean. You are looking for water. You're looking for food. But instead, you find a cave. And inside that cave, buried in the darkness, you find a skull. It is human-like, but it is wrong. It is massive, twice the size of a man's head. And right in the center of the forehead, there is a single gaping hole, a single eye socket. You panic. You run back to the ship. You tell the crew that this island belongs to a race of one-eyed giant monsters. You tell them you have found the home of the Cyclops. For thousands of years, we thought the story of the Cyclops was just a myth, a scary story told by the Greeks to explain the dangers of the unknown. We thought they made it up. But we were wrong. The Cyclops was real. The skulls exist. We have found them. And the creature they belong to is even stranger than the myth itself. Welcome to Primeval Life. Today, we're solving one of history's greatest monster mysteries. Section 1. The Legend of the One-Eyed Giant. To understand the discovery, we first have to understand the fear. The Cyclops is one of the oldest monsters in human history. The most famous one, Polyphemus, appears in Homer's The Odyssey. He was a giant, a man-eater, a shepherd who lived in a cave and smashed ships with boulders. The Greeks didn't just tell these stories for fun, they believed them. They believed that in the distant past, giants walked the earth. And why wouldn't they? Every now and then, a farmer plowing a field or a sailor exploring a cave would dig up a bone that was simply too big to be human. If you find a thigh bone the size of a tree trunk, you don't think dinosaur or mammoth, because those concepts didn't exist yet. You think giant human. But the skull was the smoking gun. On the islands of Sicily, Crete, and Cyprus, ancient people kept finding these specific, terrifying skulls. They looked vaguely human, but with that undeniable central hole for a massive eye. It wasn't until modern paleontology took a closer look that we realized the Greeks weren't lying about what they found. They just misunderstood what they were looking at. So what was it? What creature leaves behind a skull that looks like a giant demon? The answer is the dwarf elephant. Specifically, a species known as Palaeoloxodon falconeri. Here's the twist. If you look at an elephant skull today, stripped of its flesh and trunk, it looks terrifyingly alien. Elephants have a massive nasal cavity, a giant hole right in the center of their forehead where the trunk muscles attach. To an ancient Greek sailor who had never seen an elephant before, that nasal cavity didn't look like a nose, it looked exactly like a giant single eye socket. The actual eye sockets of an elephant are on the sides of the head, and they are deep and shadowed, hard to notice if you don't know anatomy. But that central hole, it stares right at you. This is the origin of the Cyclops. It wasn't a monster, it was a prehistoric elephant that had been trapped in the Mediterranean. But this leads to an even bigger question. How did elephants get onto tiny Greek islands, and why were they so small? Section 3. The Science of Shrinking Giants. This is where the story gets biologically fascinating. Millions of years ago, during the Ice Ages, massive ancient elephants, far bigger than the ones we see today in Africa, roamed across Europe. When the sea levels rose, some of these elephants got trapped on islands like Sicily and Malta. Now, imagine you're a 10-ton animal trapped on an island. There is limited food. There is limited space. If you stay big, you starve, you die. So evolution pulls a trick called insular dwarfism, or Foster's rule. Over thousands of years, the elephants began to shrink. The smaller ones survived because they needed less food. They kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller. The result was Palaeoloxodon falconeri. These weren't the giants the Greeks imagined. These were elephants the size of a large dog. Some stood only 3 feet at the shoulder. They were basically pony-sized elephants. They were adorable, not monstrous. But their skulls Because their brains stayed relatively large while their bodies shrank, their skulls remained weirdly bulbous and human-like. So when the Greeks found these skulls thousands of years later, they didn't see a cute mini elephant. They saw the head of a monster. Section 4. The reality of the Cyclops life. Let's reconstruct the world of the real Cyclops. Imagine walking through the forests of ancient Sicily or Crete. It's a bizarre ecosystem. Because there were no large predators, no lions, no wolves, the island animals behaved strangely. You would see giant swans that had lost the ability to fly. You would see giant dormice, and thundering through the underbrush, you would see herds of tiny elephants. They were the rulers of these islands. They had no natural enemies. They didn't need to fear anything. They likely lost their aggression. They were peaceful, social animals, grazing on island vegetation, living in a protected paradise. But paradise doesn't last forever. The irony is that the Greeks feared the Cyclops as a man-eater, but in reality, the Cyclops, the dwarf elephant, was the victim. Section 5. Did humans meet them? This is the part that gives me chills. We used to think these dwarf elephants died out long before humans arrived. We thought the Greeks only found the fossils. But new evidence suggests something darker. On the island of Telos, remains of dwarf elephants have been carbon dated as recently as 4,000 years ago. That is not prehistory. That is the Bronze Age. That is the time of the pyramids. That is the time of the myths. This means the very first humans to arrive on these Mediterranean islands didn't just find skulls. They might have found the living animals. Imagine the encounter. Early settlers land on the island. They see these strange, small, trunked creatures. They're slow. They're not afraid of humans because they've never seen a predator before. They would have been incredibly easy to hunt. The sad reality is that the Cyclops, the dwarf elephant, was likely hunted to extinction by the very people who later made them into monsters. We ate the Cyclops, and once the meat was gone, all that was left were the skulls. Section 6. The legacy. Over generations, the memory of the living animal faded. The grandfather who hunted the small beast died. The story changed. The creature got bigger in the telling. The trunk was forgotten. The central hole became an eye, and the puny 3-foot-tall dwarf elephant became the 20-foot-tall man-eating giant. This happens all the time in history. The griffin was likely a protoceratops fossil found in Asia. The dragon was likely a dinosaur. But the Cyclops is special because it shows how our ancestors tried to make sense of the world. They found evidence of a life form they couldn't understand, so they built a mythology to explain it. The Cyclops was real. It just wasn't a giant. It was a dwarf. And it wasn't a monster. It was a marvel of evolution that got trapped on the wrong island at the wrong time. So, the next time you see a picture of an elephant skull, look in the center. Look at that dark, gaping hole. And ask yourself, if you found that in a dark cave with no textbook to tell you what it was, would you have run away? I know I would have. If you enjoyed this journey into the truth behind the myths, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We're digging up the past every week here on Primeval Life. And let me know in the comments, what other mythical creature do you think was actually a real animal? The Kraken? The Yeti? Let me know, and I might cover it in the next video. Thanks for watching, and stay curious.